Well, hello and welcome to the Mindset Mentor. I'm Tania Kolar. I hope you are having an absolutely phenomenal day today. And of course, as always, here on the Mindset Mentor, we are helping you cultivate a life you love. Your mindset is like a muscle that needs to be strengthened and conditioned, and this is your mindset workout. Today's show, we're going to focus on, some emotions. In fact, so if you find yourself, or do you find yourself is more appropriate, feeling too emotional or too sensitive, feeling overwhelmed. Well, if you do, you might be what is considered a highly sensitive person, which is a trait that affects about 15 to 20% of the population, I believe. And we're going to learn all about that with my guest. She actually is an HSP, so a highly sensitive person. So she's going to talk about what that means, how it affects your day-to-day, personal life, but also your business, your career, your professional life. And if you are an HSP or a loved one, she's going to explain how you can better support that. Of course, being a highly sensitive person comes with some great advantages, but on the flip side, there's also some really challenging moments that you will absolutely want to learn. That's going to help you. So to really navigate your day. So I want to welcome in my guest, who is a speaker. She is a coach. She's a host of the Happy Space podcast, and she's also a productivity catalyst. So she's really helping to work with helping to not only get more productive, but also to foster better overall well-being. So let's say hello and welcome to Clare Kumar. Clare, it is an absolute pleasure having you join us here today.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Great to be with you.
Well, phenomenal. So it's so interesting because I think a lot of people can relate to being overly sensitive, or maybe growing up with a family member who was overly sensitive.
Mhm.
But I don't think people understand that it's actually considered to be a genetic trait. So let's talk about, first of all, what is a highly sensitive person?
Yeah, what is this thing? It's
Yeah.
actually a trait discovered by a Dr. Elaine Aron, and it was in the early 90s. She was actually with a therapist at the time having a conversation, as you do.
Hmm.
And the therapist said to her, "Well, perhaps, Elaine, you're highly sensitive." And that stuck in her mind as she was thinking back over the conversation. And then she devoted her life into digging into what this meant. And she's discovered that it's actually a trait found in over 100 species of animal.
Hmm.
And there are specific tendencies or qualities that highly sensitive people have. Now, one thing I do want to say right off the top is that I've heard Elaine say before that she'd probably change the name if she could,
Hmm.
because in our culture right now, sensitivity, even though it's an incredible superpower to have this highly responsive, receptive, perceptive nervous system, it's often viewed as a weakness. And she doesn't want the name to dissuade people from identifying with it. So we could be considered highly perceptive, highly responsive. And so if that language resonates with you a little more, you can think of it that way.
Yeah, I'm glad that you clarified that because there definitely is this, perception of, oh my gosh, I don't want to be considered weak, and being
Mhm.
sensitive is a bad thing. I mean, everything in life I think has its good and bad, qualities, and so
Mhm.
being highly sensitive can absolutely serve you, but it can also find you in some deep challenges. So I'm glad that you're here to bring some awareness and shed some light on what HSP is. I think that a lot of people may be a highly sensitive individual or know someone who's a highly sensitive person, but not really understand that there's a different sort of makeup and wiring of a highly sensitive person. So it's really important that we can help people identify what that is. So I also want to talk to you about your personal experience because you are what's considered an HSP. So how did
That's right.
you determine that you were highly sensitive?
I was thinking back to when did I stumble upon this? And I think it was just online research one night. And I'd spend a lot of time in self discovery, reflection, and so on. And
Hmm.
it's about 5 years ago, I stumbled onto the work. And there's a self test that you can take. So on Dr. Elaine Aron's site, the hsperson.com,
Mm-hmm.
you can find a self-test. And it's simple that you don't even have to sign up with an email. You can just take the test and find out, does this apply to you or not? And it
Mm-hmm.
asks about your responsiveness to different things. And you can pretty quickly self-identify, oh my gosh, yes, that makes sense to me. That makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's really helpful. So I would encourage anybody who listens to our conversation and thinks, oh gosh, that could be me, go to that site and check it out. And she does have a really good book too that really encapsulates it, called The Highly Sensitive Person. And the test is right in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the easiest way. But what I did, what really happened for me is when I was going through the questions, I'm like, oh, that's me and that's me and that's me. And this is why when I was at book club, I refused to read a book because the paper was too rough. That's an
Oh,
example. It's like, I can't spend
interesting.
400 pages with this. This is not pleasant, right?
Wow. Okay, so let's kind of identify what that particular issue was for you, being an
Yeah.
HSP, because maybe if I picked up that book or someone who is not an HSP would just not even notice the paper, quality. So what is it
Yeah.
specifically that
Yeah.
identifies that, wow, I don't like that. I don't like this book.
Right. I
Pages, the
mean,
pages.
and it's kind of sad because I'm sure it was a great book, but,
Mm-hmm.
and it sold maybe millions of copies, but I had an instant visceral, this is not for you. Like you just can't. And there's a jacket I had, and the fabric in the pocket
Mm-hmm.
was so like stuck to my fingers. Like it was not like a soft velour. It was a fabric that would catch on your skin kind of thing. And I hate it. I was like, no, can't, no, that's a no. Kids with tags and irritation,
Mm-hmm.
you've seen an evolution in some brands to printed labels. And
Right.
that could be more cost effective, but it could also be in part being sensitive to the sensitivity some people have to irritating tags. So,
Interesting. So
so
that's
there's,
something
yeah.
common then for an HSP to not really, or to maybe be hyper aware of the fabric itself and how that
Yeah, so
feels, the
there's
tactile
four.
feel. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. There's four different areas. I'll explain them all, and that's one of them. And
Mm-hmm.
that's actually the last one I'll talk about. There's an acronym that they call DOES, DOES. And this is a kind of a simple way to remember it.
Mm-hmm.
D stands for depth of processing. So we spend time, if we've got incoming information, we will spend time thinking about it rather deeply and making more correlations to other parts of our brain. Like we can be highly creative because we're making all these connections. If
Mm-hmm.
we see a movie and it's very emotional or intense, the subject matter, I know for myself, I would need quiet time. I couldn't come out and go, oh my God, that was a great show, blah, blah. I needed time to kind of process what I just experienced. And it's like deeply affecting. So depth of processing is one aspect.
Mm-hmm.
O stands for overstimulation or overarousal. And so imagine, let's take the CNE, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not my favorite place to go because there's so much
Many lights.
noise, there's so many crowds, there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of incoming stimulation, and I'm exhausted very, very quickly in that environment. Same with the Mandarin. Sorry, Mandarin. Like I cannot do that restaurant. Give me spoon and fork where it's a table service. They're bringing my plate. So that gives you sort of an idea of environmental overstimulation that can happen.
Yeah, so like that in a restaurant environment, right? So you're speaking to a restaurant that is a buffet style. So there's commotion, people up and down, different areas of the room. So there is a lot going on. It's a busy place,
Yeah,
and obviously, the CNE, which is that the exhibition.
yeah,
Lots of action, lots of noise,
yeah.
lots of lights, and so yeah, that overstimulation. I think for a lot of people is a little bit too much at some point. I think everyone kind of has their limit, but then a highly sensitive person is going to experience that much more intensely, to my understanding. Is that correct?
Exactly, exactly. So I liken it to, so imagine taking the subway, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and I will be so sensitive to the brakes that are screeching and the announcements that come on that you can't really hear anyway, and the jostling because the platform is not really very wide, and really sensitive to somebody who's coming down, and all of a sudden I don't feel I have my safe, secure space to walk along. There's a lot of things, and I liken them to taxes. that you're going through their day, and each of these things is a little bit of tax that you're paying. And you might make it only till 3 o'clock and you've got no more, money to pay the tax
Yeah,
man at this
yeah,
point,
yeah.
because the whole experience, and then imagine going into an open concept office where
Hmm.
you don't have visual privacy. There was one client I was working with, they had a floor of 200 people and it was all open. So
Mm.
now, if it was me, if I was lucky enough to have my back to that, not from a psychological safety, because you feel vulnerable that way, but if I was looking out a window, I'd
Hmm.
feel okay. But if I was looking at 200 people all day, that's a lot of visual information coming in. Never
Yeah.
mind, they had pretty good sound baffling,
Hmm.
but there's a lot of information coming in. So yeah, so the environments themselves can be very depleting. That whole construct of what you're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. So my question is if you are, an HSP, can you actually turn it off? Do you have control over that, or is that just that's how life is and you have to, take it as it comes?
That's exactly how life is. So,
Mm.
what I urge people to do is, as much as possible, curate what comes into your life.
Hmm.
Right? So you, as much when you do have an opportunity to control, be really thoughtful. Do I really want to watch a horror movie before I go to bed?
Yeah.
Right? Or do I want to go and partake in a really noisy atmosphere? Maybe you do. Maybe you, and there are many of us who like and get our energy from other people. We're 30% extroverted, 70% introverted. So
Hmm.
30% of us like to go to a party and connect, but we need some downtime afterwards, or we need to have it. Sometimes I'll have a nap beforehand to make sure my energy reserves are up, and then I can spend them when I'm at the party, kind of thing.
Interesting to hear all that, because I would imagine that for relationships, understanding that your partner is a highly sensitive person can really help to, improve that relationship. Because I'd imagine if one
Yep.
person is and one person isn't, they process things differently. I mean, everybody's individual, everyone has their own
Yeah.
perception. But when you really
Yeah.
have complete opposites and you don't understand what somebody is feeling, you think, well, why is this bothering you? It shouldn't bother you because it doesn't bother me. But of course, that's not the truth, right?
Exactly. And so, I spent a lot of time as a professional organizer in people's homes with
Hmm.
people talking about their spaces, right? And you'll very rarely find two people who are like, oh, I like it this way and I like it the same way. That never happened, right? There's
Yeah,
always
hello reality to relationships.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's always more tension in a particular environment for one person than another.
Hmm.
And so I would always sort of say cater to, in any shared space, bringing the visual noise down. And the analogy I would say, to try and have someone understand what you're experiencing, say you're the highly sensitive person and your partner is not,
Hmm.
ask them what kind of music they really, really don't like. Usually there's a genre and somebody's just like, oh gosh, this is just not my kind of music. Let's
Hmm.
just pick on country, even though it's a wonderful form of
Yep.
music. Don't
Okay.
hate
Yep.
me, but let's just pick on country
Hmm.
and use the analogy like, okay, darling, you don't like country music. Imagine I'm walking with a ghetto blaster from the day on my
Hmm.
shoulder with that music cranked, and it's country and
Yeah.
it's in your ear. Well, that's what this visual stimulation is for me.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
people usually can kind of connect with, there's something too loud and I don't like it. Or you could liken it to a food. You know what? Oh, you don't like mushrooms? Well, imagine that all you have to eat right now is mushrooms. It's like
Hmm.
sensually so unpleasant.
Hmm.
Or
So
there's a bad smell. Like, yeah,
yeah, and it's overpowering, it's overbearing for you, where somebody
right.
else may not even notice that bad smell, right? Or
Well,
they
yeah, for
just
example, go buy a Bed Bath and Body Works or
yep.
Lush. Some people with that are sensitive to smell, incredibly overwhelming. I'll be like, I'm outside the store, it's beautiful, the products are gorgeous, but all of
Hmm.
that all at once, or the cleaning aisle in the grocery store, lots of
Wow.
overwhelming scents that, and we may be, physiologically, they may not be great for us. That's could be part of it, but we're just overwhelmed by the experience in that environment.
So I would imagine then, being that sensitive to that external world and everything
Mhm.
around you, and even the sensorial aspect of it, that That's a full-time thing going on, unless you're sleeping, right? There's like, okay, there's a little bit of a reprieve, but I would
And even then
imagine,
we're
yeah.
sensitive sleepers. So
Oh
that's a
my
whole other
gosh.
conversation, right? This is why
Wow.
I have a Simmons Beauty Rest mattress, because that was the one, remember the bowling ball that's bouncing on one side and the other person doesn't move? That's
Yes.
why I picked that mattress.
Oh
So,
gosh. Oh my goodness. Well, it's interesting, right? So, I mean, there are things that you can do. And by the way, I
yeah.
just want to call out for everyone who's listening that there's definitely benefits to being a highly sensitive person. So, we'll talk
Yeah.
about that as well.
Yes.
Don't panic, if you are a highly sensitive person. But, it's really important that we are, helping people now start to understand that it really
Mm-hmm.
is a thing. And
Mm-hmm.
some people, a portion of the population
Mm-hmm.
are highly sensitive people. And it's so important, I think, just as humans, always, to understand each other better. So
Yeah.
the more that we can understand each other, the more, cohesive the human experience will be, on the planet, right?
Exactly. So just, to tap onto this strength and give you some optimism. So we were talking about DOES, does the
Mm-hmm.
acronym. E stands for two things in the model. One is emotional reactivity. So yes, there are some people that will be very emotionally triggered, and they will be expressive of their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
But not everybody's a crier. Not everybody's a nervous wreck. I was reading some kind of description, and that's not apt. There is a spectrum, and there are all kinds of reactions. So I don't cry that often myself. So
Mm-hmm.
to say I'm emotionally sensitive, not necessarily. So there are
Oh,
lots
okay.
of different expressions of
Degrees.
it. Yeah,
Yes,
there's a
that's a good
range,
one.
right?
Okay,
The
so we're going to take a break, but we're going to come back and talk more about that range and dive into, the emotional expression of what, being a highly sensitive person entails. So stay with us here on Saga 960. We will be back after this. You're listening to The Mindset Mentor. Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Mindset Mentor. I'm Tania Kolar. Today we are talking about highly sensitive people. Those are, known as HSPs. You may or may have not heard of it before. So, really, today I want to shed some light on what being a highly sensitive person actually is. It is a genetic trait. 15 to 20% of the population are HSPs. And if you're listening to this, we're going to help you to understand perhaps if you are a highly sensitive person or a loved one. We all interact with each other and we're all different, right? So we all have a different range of emotions, expectations, all of that stuff, right? And so if we can understand each other better and listen to what other people need and want and how they're perceiving things, relationships, whether it's personal or professional, can actually be much smoother if we get that good understanding of each other. So I think it's important to have shows like this to really help people identify that, there are differences. And in this case, differences in being a highly sensitive person. My guest today, Clare Kumar, she is a highly sensitive person. She's also a speaker, a coach, a podcast host as well. But has a really deep understanding of a sensitive temperament and how that can actually serve you or serve a loved one. So we're going to delve deep. We're going to pick up the conversation where we left off, and we're talking about the benefits, the emotional aspect of being an HSP. So Clare, again, thanks for being here and shedding some light on, I think, a rather unknown genetic trait that it is.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to shine a light on it, because it does have its challenges, but it's also, I consider it a superpower. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things we were talking about, DOES, the acronym for the four qualities that show up,
Mm-hmm.
and E is for emotional reactivity,
So
which
can
we
we just
touched
go
on a little
back?
bit.
Can we just go back to D so
Yeah.
people understand that who are just tuning in?
Of
So yeah,
course. Yeah.
let's go
Depth
through
of
D.
processing.
Mm-hmm.
So we deeply, analyze and think about information. We might take a little longer to give you an answer, but it'll be a good answer.
A
We
very thoughtful answer. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We are often overstimulated or over aroused by our environment, which can lead to some exhaustion if we're not careful. And
Mm.
then we got to E, which is emotional reactivity. And also, what I love about us is empathy. So, one of the great things that makes us great leaders, wonderful parents, wonderful friends, wonderful partners is that we're really thinking and feeling another person's experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and we are motivated to act when we're in a strong state ourselves and able to give. We can be then having our radar on to look at the experience that's out there for everyone and kind of elevate it for everyone. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the animals I love that I use as an analogy in a lot of my talks is the meerkat.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you can think about a meerkat. It's this long mongoose type animal, right?
Yeah.
And these, you will see a few of them standing on their hind legs, looking around, smelling, sensing, listening. They're keeping watch, right? They're keeping watch so everyone else can either chill out and sleep or eat or do whatever they want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I like in the highly sensitive person too, except that we have to make sure we get enough naps and rest and so on. So the meerkats, they take breaks. They're on duty and then they, have a big dinner and then they have a big sleep kind of
Yeah.
thing. And this rotates between. But the highly sensitive person has to make sure they're managing all of that rest too. And the world can be increasingly inhospitable in terms of sensory input. So that's part of why I'm doing this is that I want to really have people understand who they are and better support those that they love, who this might be a trait for. But I also really am excited about urban design and corporate office design, shared spaces, that they become hospitable for more people.
Yeah, well, it certainly makes a difference. When you're comfortable in your surroundings, whether that's in the home environment, which of course a lot of people are, locked in their homes at this point, spending a
Yeah.
lot of time at home. And if you don't love your surroundings, if something's making you uncomfortable, it's going to completely change your day, your physiology, even, right? So,
Hmm.
and so it's important that we take a look at our surroundings, do what we can to clean it up, so to speak. And I'd love to get some tips and advice on how we can do that, in particular too for the HSP, but for everybody really, because that our home are really, it's an extension of who we are, and
Right.
it should be a space where we have the most comfort, when we can really relax and, like the meerkat, take that break right when you need to find that balance in life. And I think it's important, because as you were talking about the emotional aspect and taking on people's emotions, and being empathetic,
Yeah.
it can get exhausting when you're taking on everybody's feelings. It's
100%.
overwhelming, and I think a lot of people now can relate to that, being in a home environment where now they're home with everybody, with their partner, with the kids, with the pets,
Yeah.
or it's solo, and is still adapting to different things, right? So let's talk a little bit about that, and how we can better create the environment that's conducive to having more calm and
Right.
peace.
Well, you actually are touching on the S in the DOES qualities. S is our sensitivity to very subtle stimuli.
Mm,
So there are the studies show that highly sensitive people are in fact a little bit more stressed out in the home environment, and they can be more stressed out at work as well. And
mm-hmm.
this is in large part because of things in the environment which are taxing. So let's take physical visual chaos. And a lot of people would use the word clutter. I've never been a fan of the word clutter just for the reason I think it dishonors what we own. It's like the
Mm-hmm.
way weeds dishonor beautiful plants. They just happen to be in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
But we can have, number one, we can have different preferences for what our home environment feels, what feels good to us. It can be vastly different. Some people like everything away and the counters clear.
Mm-hmm.
Some people feel way more comfortable with a sense of abundance and little visual things to look at. And so understanding first of all your individual preferences, and then understanding together how to craft shared spaces so that you can all have environments in which you feel like you can, what I call, have moments of exhale where you can just relax in that space.
Mm-hmm.
Each person should have an individual space that they can make their own haven, I would
I
say.
I love that because I was just thinking about that when you're talking about having a shared space. I'm like,
Mhm.
wow. But, if you have two people that are polar opposite in their likes, I'm like, how? I mean, that's going to be tough because nobody's really going to love it if you find the balance in between, right? So I think that's a great point that even though
Yeah.
you have shared space, find a space, maybe even a little space, right? That's all about you.
Right, right. But in the shared spaces, I do advocate for catering to the person who is most sensitive
Okay.
in the shared space. So that
Mhm.
might mean more structure, more places for things to go, so that that space, when let's say mom's the HSP in this, and it's not gender specific at all, but let's just say
Yep.
mom is, and she's spending time in that space, the more that you can have systems and baskets to corral things on the counter, for example, a homework station that things go away, and the
Hmm.
more the family understands what each person needs, the more it can be an environment in which mom doesn't lose her mind by the end of the day, kind of thing,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Right.
Oh my goodness, because I think a lot of people can relate to that. It's like, why can't you just put this away? And it's like it drives you crazy. And they may not even notice. So to your
Right.
point, you were talking about in that shared space that you would focus more, put the priority on the person that's more sensitive. And it
Yep.
does that makes sense because, if they really have a hyper reaction to something and the other
Yeah.
person really doesn't matter what or care one way or the other,
Right.
then it does make sense, to have really everybody feeling their best. And I think it's key to maybe even ask each other because I think a lot of it nobody even asks, well,
It's
what do
not
you
talked
like?
about. It's really
Yeah.
not talked about until
Hmm.
something doesn't feel good, and then it's like, why is the toilet roll not changed? Why is the toothpaste squeezed out and there's like toothpaste everywhere?
Why'd you
You
leave the
know?
socks on the floor?
Right. Well, how can
Yeah.
you? Well, I came up with an acronym with my daughter, TALB. Take a look behind you. Take a look behind
Ah,
you, because
okay.
you can be so focused, and this can happen to me too.
Yep.
I'll be focused on making my sandwich, sitting down and having it, and then I'll be like, "Oh, look at the counter. That's a disaster. I need to take a look behind me and
Yeah.
go, restore order." So
Hmm.
I think, yeah, the point I think to make between, it could be people in an office environment, it could be your partner, it could be with you and your kids, is to really have a loving, generous, I care about you and this home needs to serve all of us. So
Hmm.
what do you need? Like, to feel great in the morning, what does it look like? When I talk about my 4-step plan to get organized, P was for prioritization.
Hmm.
And that was, what do you want to do in this space? And also, well, how do you want it to feel? And then show me an example of how do you want it to feel, because I need to understand what that looks like. So Pinterest is awesome. Magazines are awesome to go,
Yep.
this is my ideal. This is
Yep.
what I want it to look like, because that's the feeling I get in the space is going to come from what that looks like. So
Mm.
it's really worth having generous, loving conversations when you're, have breakfast, have had a good sleep, and come together. And this is a good Saturday or weekend morning kind of conversation, not a good end of day. Everybody's depleted already. And like, now you want to, no, pick a good time where your tank is full, and just
Hmm.
say, like, what can we create as a family so each of us feels really good?
Yeah, that's really great awareness to have. If you are a highly sensitive person as well, it's like, well, and not just that. I mean, everybody has triggers, right? Those trigger
Mm-hmm.
points that sets them over the edge, something
Yeah.
that normally wouldn't bother them. When you hit that trigger button and things are really blown out of proportion. So it is, key to have that awareness. And so another thing I think is important is, and, maybe you can better explain this or, tell me if I'm thinking correctly. So if you are an HSP, obviously you talked about relationships. It's important to ask, what the other
Yeah.
person needs. But what about if
Yeah.
you're that HSP?
Mm-hmm.
I think do some people not even know what their own wants are? I mean, they know what they don't like because they feel overstimulated or hypersensitive and too much going on. But do they actually know what they want? Is the question.
It's that's the really key starting point for designing a life that you love, right? And it applies to many aspects. It applies to what kind of partner, what do you want in a partner?
Hmm.
It applies to what you want in your space. It applies to what clothing you choose. Like, what do you want from the choices that you're going to make? And so, yes, I think. what it does take is some self-reflection. I call it tuning in before you lean in to something. You got to tune in and pay attention to, sure, what you don't like. That's a very good clue that something is not for you. But
Hmm.
tuning into joy moments, tuning in as well and reflecting on, oh, that went really well. Why did that morning go so well? Oh, well, it's because we made sure we had food for everyone. We went to bed early. There was a certain amount of planning probably that helped us get out the door, and we weren't running late and with everything forgotten. Like there are different things that are actually in place setting you up for success. And if you can figure out what those are, then that's really powerful. When I work with my coaching clients on well-being, I have a group of what I call productivity table stakes. And there are 8 different items like sleep and light and mindset, protecting your mindset, a number of different areas that you need to understand your relationship to. And when you do, you can say, "Ah, I thrive when I've had 7.5 hours of sleep. So I now know to protect that. I now know to structure my life to set up for that success. And I now know to defend it with grace so that I can be more set up to be able to sustain my energy to give and contribute to the people that I love and the colleagues that I work with and the community that I serve."
Yeah, I love that. So, you had mentioned earlier about the self-assessment
Mhm.
for, to understand whether you are a highly sensitive person or not. Can you share with us some of the questions that would be on that list?
Oh, I can. You know what? I'm going to actually make sure I pull directly because I've got the book beside me. So I might as well.
Perfect.
How about this? Okay. I seem to be aware of subtleties in my environment. Number one. Number
Hmm.
two, other people's moods affect me.
Okay, so I guess that that empathetic portion, the quotient is
Hmm.
is key to that question.
Yep. I am conscientious.
Hmm.
I startle easily. I'm annoyed when people try to get me to do too many things at once. Right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
so it's interesting now as we're at home being a speaker. I was talking to fellow speakers last week, and I see a lot of people with switchers to set up multiple camera angles. And, there's a boom mic and there's another mic. And I thought, that's like being the drummer in a band. And
Mm.
our band is on a hiatus right now, but when I'm in a band, I sing and I might be able to do the tambourine. That's it. I am not the drummer doing like 4 different tempos with 4 different parts of my body and singing on top of that.
Hmm.
So, monotasking is great for everybody, but particularly for HSPs.
Well, yeah, I love that. It's a good analogy as well because you can really sort of see the difference between what a singer is versus a drummer, that loud banging and the constant motion, right?
Yeah.
So, that's great. So the self-assessment test, you can do that online. What's the site for that, Claire?
hsperson.com.
Perfect. And so
Yeah.
you'll get your results, I guess, immediately when you type in, the key
Yeah, it's
information.
basically, yeah, you can tally it up right there. I think it's 26, 27 questions. And
Okay.
yeah, and she's made it very, very accessible. Actually, they're not numbered here, but I think it's about that.
Okay.
And so it doesn't take very long to do. Yeah, and she says, okay, if you answer true to 12 or more, you're probably highly sensitive.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and so it's a very simple. It's like just I think under half or about half of the questions. If you answer yes to, then there's a chance that you have this trait. But I was like 20 something, like, yes, that's me, that's me.
Yep, yep,
So to
yep.
the point of highly conscientious, I
Mhm.
wanted to just share one great thing is that people at work that are HSPs have trended to have stronger performance reviews. So
Mm.
we care, we put so much into our work, we're so thoughtful, we deliver great work. But if that environment is very taxing, then we're going to be so depleted. It's actually the reason I left the corporate world. I could
Mm.
not negotiate. It seems funny now that I couldn't negotiate enough working from home since we've kind of all figured out it's possible. But
Exactly.
back in 2008, it was like, no, I need you in your office for, a bunch of reasons. But performance isn't the issue. So I urge leaders to think about really allowing autonomy for HSPs, because we care a lot about what we do, but we need to preserve our energy. We need a lot of flexibility. So, a great leadership question for anybody, but for HSPs in particular, is what do you need to succeed? What do you need
Mm-hmm.
to succeed? You can ask this of your teenager. It's like, what do you need? What do you need to get your best results? What do you need to succeed? What do you think? Let's experiment with some things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that self-awareness, right? Is always a beautiful thing, in
Hmm.
all aspects. And it kind of reminds me of children at school. It's like, here's the lesson. Everyone's got to do the same thing, but everybody processes it differently and learns differently. So,
Yeah,
one person may not absorb it the same way. It doesn't mean they both don't know how to do it. It's just there's different means to get to the same end,
that's right.
or to get to that understanding. So, very similar in that sense in terms of, really understanding, a highly sensitive person and what they need in that, corporate environment, or, again, even the home
Hmm.
environment as well. So we're going to take a break and we're going to continue with my guest, Clare Kumar. She is a speaker, a coach. She's also a productivity catalyst. So I know you do a lot of work in the corporate world, and help people understand that environment because you lived it, you understand it, you get it, you knew what worked and what didn't work. And I think that's really key to optimizing our productivity, optimizing our potential, understanding what motivates you, what demotivates you, what gets that juices flowing for you, right? So I think that's the goal. We all want to live our best life, and so awareness is certainly key. So stay tuned. We'll be back here on Sauga 960 with the Mindset Mentor. Well, hello, and welcome back to the Mindset Mentor. Today, we are helping you cultivate a life you love by shedding some awareness on what an HSP person is. So, HSP is a highly sensitive person, or again, known as HSP. If you find yourself feeling, too emotional, or you say that you're too sensitive, or someone else thinks that you're too sensitive, you may actually be an HSP, which affects about 15 to 20% of the population. And it's a genetic thing. So it's not a choice, it's a genetic makeup, it's in your DNA. So I've got my guest joining me today, Clare Kumar. She is a coach, speaker, she's a podcast host as well, and she is an HSP. So she's shedding some light on what being a highly sensitive person is, and not only some of the detractors of day-to-day living being so highly sensitive, but some of the amazing benefits. I mean, everything in life has its ups and downs, the good, the bad, and so but think about being a highly sensitive person interacting with people all the time. It's certainly, I would imagine, Claire, is a little bit taxing on the overload of emotions that you're taking on, not only your own emotions but everybody around you. So can you talk a little bit of more, from your own personal experience, how you handled emotional overload before you even knew you were an HSP, and what the difference was now that you have a different understanding of what this actually is?
That's a great question. So, yeah, emotional overload. I think I would notice it in different situations. I remember watching a movie as a child, and it was an upsetting movie. And I remember my mom turning to me and said, "Oh, Claire doesn't cry." But I had this lump in my throat all of a sudden, and it it had nowhere to go. And then my sisters, though, were like with tears flying everywhere. So
Mm,
it's interesting because we might feel things, but we might not have expressed them. But we are sort of tuned into the emotion that's expressed by people around us, and we will feel it. So I think the big point is, no matter whether it's physical stimulation, emotional stimulation, all of that, we want to be very, very careful about what we're deciding to let in. So there are certain people that, for example, if somebody is always coming at you with a negative, my glass is half full, or actually I don't even have a glass,
yeah.
that kind of feeling,
Yeah.
you might want to limit contact with how heavy somebody is around you, because there's a great chance it will pull you down too. So I gave a talk this week earlier about setting boundaries, and it can be a very difficult thing to do, but it's a great act of self-respect and self-love, and it actually preserves your compassion for other people when you take care of what you're letting close to you, so that you can keep your energy up to keep giving. Brene Brown says the most compassionate people are the most boundaried.
Mm. And it is a great point, absolutely. And yeah, it can be very difficult to set boundaries, especially if you've had no boundaries for decades, right?
Mhm.
But we do definitely teach people how to treat us, and we can reteach them if we don't like the lesson we've been giving them.
That's
Right?
absolutely right. And we're doing
Mhm.
that as parents with our kids all the time. The consequences have to be real. I
Mhm.
remember I lived in Tokyo for a while, and this was early in my marriage. And the man, he's no longer my husband. We weren't
Mhm.
lovely person, not meant to be with an HSP. So,
Got yeah, yeah.
and
Mhm.
he was chronically late. And people, I
Mhm.
remember for our wedding, people were like, "You got to tell him at least an hour early, otherwise he's not going to be there on
Oh
time,
my
right?"
good. Yeah, even for his wedding, you're worried about that. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
in Tokyo, we'd have to meet. I mean, it was a city of, in 1997, 98, 20 million people in the day, right?
Wow.
And he looks Japanese. He's like third
Mhm.
generation, but he looks Japanese. You try and spot somebody at a crowded subway station and everybody looks Japanese. So the dark hair, the complexion is the same.
Mhm.
It was frustrating to meet someone and have them be late all the time,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I finally decided one day, it's like, okay, you know what? I'm emotionally fluctuating between fear that something's happened to you and annoyance that you're late again, darn it. Right. And so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought, you know what do I need to do to set a construct for myself that I'm happy with? And I thought, you know what? We're going to meet at 7, let's say. I'm going to always give you a half an hour. So that allows some leeway because,
Mhm.
stuff goes sideways. And this was before cell phones. Well, no, before I had a cell phone. They were in Japan at that time.
Okay. Mhm.
And by 7:30, now if he hadn't shown up, I would just assume not that the worst that had happened, is just
Mhm.
something had gone wrong and he wasn't there, but it wasn't going to be something, I wasn't going to sit and stew in it and let it limit what I was going to do. I would just go on to
Yeah,
do whatever I was going to do.
right. A good
He was
compromise.
and he was never late again.
Ah, interesting. Wow. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's great because it's about having that conversation. It may be a tough, difficult conversation to have and you may fear it, but I think it's important to really open up about how you're feeling. And if somebody is always late, it can be frustrating and you feel, even disrespected. But for an HSP, there's a whole other level of what that, being late entails.
Yeah, we're over processing, overthinking for that half an hour and stewing and getting really kind of upset. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Hmm.
Maybe nothing, maybe everything's fine.
Yeah.
So I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. Somebody doesn't show up, something went sideways. I stay in that place of curiosity and compassion. And then I deal with information as it comes in. But it was the sort of the strength to say, well, I'm important and I need to take care of how I'm feeling in this. So what's going to make me feel okay? I need to be, careful, caring and give some latitude, but then I need to move on and not carry this situation with me. So that's I talk to people a lot about that when they're in a relationship. It's about stepping into empathy for the other person. Like he never really believed that being late was disrespectful. So
Yeah.
we have some mindsets
Hmm.
that are completely different. So he's like, I wouldn't mind if you were late for me. So I don't think it's disrespectful if I'm late for you. I'm like, well, honey,
Yeah.
you know,
It's the
yeah,
intent, right? So you have to,
yeah.
I always say that too. I have to look at someone's intention. Did they intend to do this? And where were they coming from? Because that could really change a lot. So it's like they didn't mean to do this. What they meant
Yeah.
was something else. But the way you perceive it could be, very different from the intention, right? So I think it's
Oh,
important to
yeah.
develop the
Yeah.
intent.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Intention really matters. It doesn't necessarily excuse you from outcome
Yeah.
sometimes, but it is factored in. That's why we have
Hmm.
different, like manslaughter and charges, right? We have
Yep.
intent gets weighed into whether that was premeditated or not. So our
Hmm.
intentions actually matter a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and really key to understand how somebody could potentially process the information. Like there's the a great book, The Five Languages of Love.
Oh, love it. Five love languages.
Love, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Uh-huh.
So it's interesting because we give love the way we want to receive it. But if
Yep.
somebody else has a different way, then you could give them 110%, and they're just not getting it, and they still feel unlovable, right?
That was us. That was absolutely us. So it's interesting. When I was talking earlier, I mentioned, when you're sculpting your life, you're creating the life you want. You have to think carefully about what you want. Your point you brought up,
Mm,
and when looking for, I wanted a great chapter two. After this long, long marriage with not the right person, I thought,
mm,
I'm really excited to have great connection with the right person. And on date two, every time, five love languages came up because
mm.
in my marriage, he was really wonderful at acts of service. And I was like, you can't outsource touch, honey. It's like uncomfortable if you're outsourcing the touch part. So
Yeah.
so we were never connecting. Like lasagna isn't the same as a massage. It's just not. So
Hmm. Hmm.
so when I was dating, love languages was conversation number two. And my lovely partner now, it was conversation number two. And I said, okay, I said, here are the five love languages. Like, what do you think when you hear them? Touch, he said, without question. And so,
You're like,
so
yes.
yeah, well, I was like lottery ding ding.
Yeah.
But I said, this is really sort of a detail. But even within touch, we like to be touched in different ways, right? I
Hmm.
like a good, strong massage,
Hmm.
whereas some people really like a really, really soft touch. So,
Hmm.
even in that, where a highly sensitive person comes in, is we're tuning in to what the other person is really responding to. So, there is some science that says we're really incredible romantic partners because of that
Hmm.
extra
Well,
sensitivity.
because you pick up on the subtleties, you know what
Hmm.
somebody responds to, or what they
Yeah.
don't respond to, what they don't like, right? I think that just makes for
Yeah.
great relationship and connection, with people. It is really good to really understand what each other's needs are, right? Because there's
Mhm.
7.8 billion people on the planet. We are definitely not all the same, right? Not even close. So
Yeah,
it's
well, we're
important to get
animals,
that.
and
Uh-huh.
yeah, and we respond. Like I always say, we have to remind ourselves we're human animals, right? And we respond to all this stimulation differently. So if we can
Hmm.
pay attention to that, then we've got this real skill set in life. That's why it makes me, I think, and my clients tell me, a really good coach because I'm paying such close attention with a place of compassion and empathy and curiosity
Hmm.
for the person I'm working with. I mean, there's no danger of, like, if we're thinking of organizing TV shows back in the day. Oh, get rid of this, get rid of that. That's never something would happen because there's such care taken in the relationship when I'm working with someone. So
Hmm. Hmm. Well, people feel validated, right? And significant when you really get what they need and they want, and you hear them, right? You actually hear them.
yes,
So important. I want to
yeah.
ask you about your relationship with your kids being a
Yeah.
highly sensitive mom.
Yeah.
How does that play out? And are your kids also highly sensitive people?
So I have two beautiful children, and my son, absolutely highly sensitive. At
Hmm.
3 years old, Mom, the movie theater's too loud. I don't like movies. I think we went to Cars. He handled Cars, but didn't go to a movie theater for years after that.
Wow.
Was just
Wow.
like, this is.
Hmm.
And one thing he was brilliant at, he tuned in, incredibly self aware at like 7 years old, I think. Okay, we've just finished hockey. When's soccer going to start? Because I need a break. I don't want this overlap and having to do too much. So
Hmm.
he was always incredibly tuned in to what he needed, I thought, at a young age, which was
Hmm.
which was amazing. My daughter is more like her dad in terms of, like, stuff just doesn't bother her. Oh,
Hmm.
whatever. I like the rain. The rain is great. She's like the easiest person to get along with.
Hmm.
And so the great thing is she's empathetic. So these things are not always woven together, but
Hmm.
she doesn't have that high sensitivity. But it's so interesting, right? Because of thinking back to your environment. I mean, both my kids watched me as an organizer, creating order, and actually, she used to come with me on jobs, which was from
Hmm.
age 11. She helped me with kids' rooms and closets, which was so
Awesome. I
fun.
love it. Expertise there. Yeah. The kids know what they
And
want.
Yeah. And then as a teenager, though, her preference is for abundance around her, for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
And her room would get a little crazy with a lot of things out, and then all of a sudden she'd get the spurt and she'd tidy it up. The last thing she did a couple of years ago was set a timer on time lapse photography and
Mm-hmm.
film herself as she was tidying her room.
Oh, that's fun.
It
That's a fun
was, I'm
project.
like, this
Yeah.
is so cool. She did
Mm-hmm.
it kind of to motivate her, which was
Yep.
amazing.
Yep.
But what was interesting to me is, she had this great tolerance for this visual environment for a long time. But even then, she reached the point where she felt so much lighter after she'd done the tidying and the clearing and restored order again. But we don't all need it at the same frequency at the same time. Most of us aim for a more ordered environment at some point, but
Mm-hmm.
it varies dramatically.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Interesting. So we're coming to the end of the show. So I just want to recap for everyone again the acronym DOES and so what that stands for. So to help people understand, again, if they may be a highly sensitive person or a loved one. So it can really help us to understand each other a lot better and have more peace in our relationships. Again, whether that's a romantic relationship, family,
Yeah.
work environment.
Yeah, so hold on to your generosity and your curiosity when you go into this, talking about this. But you
Hmm.
want to look and look for this depth of processing. Does someone need time to really think through their thoughts or what they've just witnessed?
Hmm.
They might be overstimulated or over aroused. The most recent example, my partner has a car, and sometimes the automatic system on the car will turn on, and it turns on so loud I jump like 2 feet in my seat. And he's
Mm.
like, "Did that bother you?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's scary. It absolutely terrified me. Can we fix this thing?" So
Mhm.
overstimulation.
Okay, so that's the O. So the
That's the
D was
O.
the depth of processing. Okay,
Yeah.
overstimulation.
Now E is for two things: emotional reactivity
Hmm.
and empathy. Okay.
Got it.
And S is for our incredible sensitivity to subtle stimuli. So, other things that you might not notice, we have noticed. For example, if we're driving along and a lot of the new cars have a very cool, much cooler color temperature
Hmm.
to their headlights. The number of HSPs that are like, I can't look at them. In fact, they can trigger a migraine in me, that kind of white,
Oh,
cooler temperature light.
wow.
And other people are like, that's not a problem. How is that a
Hmm.
problem? Right?
Hmm.
So being really curious about someone else's experience will be a real gift here.
Wonderful. And again, if you want to take the self assessment online, what's the site, Claire?
It's Elaine Aron's site. She's the doctor who researched this, the
Hmm.
hsperson.com. And the book is The Highly Sensitive Person. So you can find a lot out about the trait there.
Awesome. And then how can any of the listeners find you, Claire?
Oh, thank you. So ClareKumar.com is my website. And I joke I'm Claire with no third eye. It's Claire, Clare, Kumar. So,
Yeah.
and then I've created an online community now on Facebook. You can find it by going to the happyspacepod.com, Happy Space Pod. And Happy Space Pod, the initials of that, of course, are HSP. So there's a little subtle nod to
Ah,
HSP and Happy Space Pod. You can
love
find me
it.
there, and the podcast will be coming soon.
Fantastic. Well, Claire, listen, it was an absolute pleasure having you here, and thank you for shedding some light on what an HSP is and firsthand experience as you are an HSP to help others to understand, how to better navigate their world or their loved ones as well. So, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Tanya.
All right, everyone, that is a wrap for today's show. This is the Mindset Mentor. Make sure that you tune in next Saturday at 11 a.m. as we continue to work out your mindset. Remember to cultivate a life you love because you absolutely deserve it.